All right, defining sensation. I believe we've seen this definition before. It's the conscious or subconscious awareness of changes in the external or internal environment. So it's being aware of a change to the body, okay? Whether that change is coming from outside, what we call the external environment, or if it's a change coming from the internal environment. Changes from the internal environment would be like changes to your blood pressure, to your pH, to the calcium levels. Those things we don't ever really know. Those things are all those have been altered. Okay, we'd say that those are subconscious awarenesses. Okay, whereas if like we're hot, we're cold, we're feeling pain or pressure, itch or tickle, we're mentally being aware of those. So we'd say we have conscious awareness of those changes. And that's what perception is. And I was talking just about that here just a few minutes ago when we were talking about those functional areas of the cortex, primary auditory area, primary visual area, et cetera, et cetera. That's what perception is. Okay? And no matter what the sensation is, the nature of it and the type of reaction generated will vary according to the ultimate destination of nerve impulses that convey sensory information to the central nervous system. So all sensations are similar and how they are created, but they're all different in how they get to these different areas in our cerebral cortex and how we process them. And we just got done talking about that in our last lecture, which is why I've pulled it back up and kind of pointed that out. There are two major categories to our senses, okay? And each type of sensation, such as touch, pain, vision, or hearing, is called a sensory modality. Those two classes or categories are the general senses and the special senses. We're going to spend the majority of this lecture, about 2/3 of it, I'd say, talking about the special senses. Okay, those special senses include smell, so we'll talk about the nose. We'll talk about the tongue some more. We've talked about it a little bit previously, but we'll talk about it again, and its role in taste. Talk about your eyeballs and associated structures of the eyes, so for vision. And then both hearing and balance involve your ears. So we'll be talking about the ears quite a bit, and that'll be the last little bits that we talk about. Okay, we won't get too much into general senses, and there's actually two types, somatics and viscerals. Somatics include tactile sensations of touch, pressure, vibration, itch, and tickle, thermals that are warm and cold, pain, and proprioceptive. Visceral senses, we won't talk really about those at all, but those provide us with information about our internal conditions. So like conditions inside your organs, so like, pressure inside your blood vessels, so that'd be blood pressure, chemical concentrations, whether that's calcium or, glucose or whatever. Stretch, that could be like stretch of your bladder, stretch of your stomach, nausea, as well as hunger and internal temperature. Now, regardless what that sensation is, whether it's itch, tickle, hot, cold, vision, hearing, whatever, it all begins with what we call a sensororeceptor. Now, in a lot of cases, sensororeceptors are just the dendrites of a neuron. Sometimes those dendrites have a little capsule around them. Okay, sometimes the dendrites are uncovered. We call those free nerve endings. In some cases, and these are only associated with some of our special senses, there's a special type of cell called a receptor cell that's first activated that then communicates with a neuron that then carries the signal into the central nervous system. So it all begins with a receptor, okay? And the general purpose of a receptor is to convert the energy of a stimulus, like in the case of cold, pressure, or something that we're tasting that's sugary, converting that energy into a nerve signal or action potential that can then be transmitted to the central nervous system so that we can interpret the stimuli acting on and within the body. So in other words, we take that stimulus, we make action potentials out of it, we carry that signal up into the spinal cord and into the brain so we process it and decide what to do with that information. As far as those three images go, I'm not really worried about them for the exam, so don't worry about studying. All right, like I said, we're going to spend the majority of our lecture talking about the special senses, but I wanted to spend just a quick moment talking about the other types of senses. Okay. That includes these 4 somatic senses: tactile, thermal, pain, and then proprioceptive. Okay, so once again, if I go back, we're going to talk about these for the most part here in a little bit. Okay, but first let's talk about generals. Like I said, we're not going to talk at all about viscerals. They're just a lot more sophisticated and complicated, and we just don't have enough time. And this is not that type of class where we need to get that far into the weeds. So we'll talk about these somatic senses that fall under this overall umbrella of the general senses. And as we said on the previous page, somatic senses include tactile, thermal, pain, proprioceptive. And you just filled in those blanks with those 4 different terms. We can say that somatic sensations arise by stimulating sensor receptors in our skin, and that's where we have a whole bunch of them, as well as the subcutaneous layer, which we know is just deep to the skin, that layer of fat and other connective tissue. But we also have sensor receptors for these sensations in the mucous membranes of the mouth, so like the inside of our mouth, inside of the vagina, inside of the anus, and then also our muscles, our tendons, our joints, and even within the inner ear. Okay. Those that arise from stimulating the skin surface, which is where we have a whole bunch of them, are called cutaneous sensations. We remember the word cutaneous we learned early in the semester, just another word to describe skin. So cutaneous sensations are just skin sensations. And as you can see here, this figure shows you the epidermis dermis is loaded. And we've seen before when we talked about the skin a couple months ago, how many receptors are in there. Okay. Keep in mind that the receptors for these somatic sensations are distributed unevenly. So they're not equally distributed throughout the body. The places with the highest density of somatic sensor receptors include the lips, the tip of our tongue, and our fingertips, the places that will therefore be the most sensitive. And if you think about these structures, especially like your fingertips, this is what we feel things with. Like if we're trying to touch something, you know, you want to feel a texture. If you want to test something before you like put it in your mouth, you might touch it to your lips or the tip of your tongue. And you don't rub the back of your leg on something to feel its texture, to feel if it's warm or cold. Put your fingers on it, you put your hands on it. Okay, and those places have the most receptors and therefore are the most sensitive. Okay, tactile sensations include the following: touch, pressure, vibration, itch, and tickle. Okay, and they involve lots of different types of receptors. Several types of encapsulated mechanoreceptors. So the dendrites are covered up with a capsule. Attached to large diameter myelinated A fibers mediate the sensations of touch, pressure, and vibration. Other tactile sensations such as itch and tickle are detected by free nerve endings. So where the dendrites are uncovered or free nerve endings encapsulated where there's a capsule around them. Okay, but they are detected by free nerve endings attached to small diameter unrelated C fibers. Okay. Now these A fibers, these C fibers, it's just referring to the size of the axon. Okay, if they have a really big axon, we call them A fibers. If they have an intermediate size axon, they're B, and then the smallest are C. Not that that's really important, but that does affect how fast they carry signals. A fibers, the biggest, carry signals the fastest. C fibers, the smallest, carry the signals the slowest. Okay, so for those that are A fibers, like touch, pressure, vibration, you carry those signals into your spinal cord, into your brain a lot faster than like when you're itchy or when you're tickled. Okay. Receptors involved with touch include what we call the corpuscles of touch, or Meissner corpuscles, which we find in the dermal papillae of our hairless skin. If you remember back when we talked about the skin, we learned that the border between the epidermis and dermis is wavy, where you have these indentations between the epidermis and dermis, and they create like a jigsaw puzzle to connect to one another. Okay, these places where the dermis is projecting outward on the skin, those are dermal papillae. Okay, and that's where you find those corpuscles of touch, or Meissner's corpuscles. Okay, but keep in mind that is going to be only found in hairless skin. So like, you know, your palms and the bottom of your feet, right? So we don't have hair there. We have hair about everywhere else though. Each corpuscle is an egg-shaped mass of dendrites enclosed by a capsule of connective tissue. Okay, aside from the fingertips, the hands, you also have them in the eyelids, the tip of your tongue, the lips, nipples, soles, clitoris and female, and the tips of a male penis. Okay. Back when we talked about the skin, we also talked about hair, and we learned about the next type of receptor, what we call hair root plexuses. Remember how we learned that around the follicle of a hair is a neuron's dendrites, which enable when you touch your hair to feel that sensation. Even though your hair is technically dead tissue, you can still feel and understand when your hair is being touched, or like when the wind blows and your hair moves, you're feeling that because you're stimulating those hair root plexuses. Okay, obviously those are going to be found in hairy skin because that's what they're associated with, hair. Okay, Merkel or tactile discs, which also go by a much longer name, type 1 cutaneous mechanoreceptors, are non-encapsulated sensory corpuscles. Touch receptors, the deepest layer, the epidermis. We actually talked about those way back when we talked about the skin as well. We find them plentiful in the hands, or in the fingertips, the hands, the lips, and the external genitalia. And the last type of touch receptors are the type 2 cutaneous mechanoreceptors, or raphini, or bulbous corpuscles, which are in the deep dermis, as well as ligaments and tendons, and are present in the hands and abundant on the soles. Now, are you going to have to identify and understand all this information? That's a lot. The answer is no. Okay, I'm just giving it to you, but I'm not going to get that carried away with what you need to know for that. So those are the sensations of touch and pressure and that kind of stuff. Okay, let's now, or excuse me, that's the sensations of touch. Now we can get into pressure. Okay, pressure involves some of those same ones we just talked about, the corpuscles of touch, or Meissner corpuscles. Type 1 cutaneous mechanoreceptors and Pacinian, which are a new type, which also go by the term lamellated or lamellar corpuscles, which are found in many places of the body, like the dermis, subcutaneous layer, submucosal tissues, underlying mucous and serous membranes around joints, tendons, and muscles, periosteum, which is that membrane around our bones, mammary glands in females, external genitalia, and even within certain internal visceral organs. Vibration includes the touch and Pacinian corpuscles. There's two types of vibrations, low frequency and high frequency. Low frequency vibrations involve those corpuscles of touch. Lamellated involve the higher frequency vibrations. Itch is going to involve free nerve endings, as well as tickle will involve free nerve endings. Okay. Also involving free nerve endings are thermal sensations. Okay, thermal sensations are detected by receptors called thermoreceptors. There are two types of thermal receptors, or thermoreceptors, cold and warm. And it's pretty obvious what cold receptors respond to. That's coldness. Warm receptors respond to warmth. Now, those also, keep in mind, there is points where they will not become stimulated by cold or warmth. And that would be like extreme cold or extreme heat, which instead of feeling cold or warm, when you feel extreme cold or extreme heat, what do you feel? What's that sensation? Pain. Okay. So pain becomes stimulated in those cases, and pain stimulates free nerve endings. So same thing where the dendrites are uncovered. The special name for those receptors are called nociceptors. Always remember, do you want to stimulate them? Most people would say no, but we find those in every tissue of the body except for our brain. So like if you have a headache, it's not your brain aching, it's something else. Okay, but they're stimulated in response to intense thermal, mechanical, or chemical stimuli, causing the release of chemicals to ultimately stimulate them. So in other words, basically if the tissue gets damaged, chemicals are released, and that's what stimulates those pain receptors. And last type is why I have this figure on the right. Okay, but before you do that, highlight the stuff that's in all caps here in this figure on the left. So free nerve ending, type 1 mechanoreceptor, or tactile disc, as it says, corpuscle touch, Meissner corpuscle, type 2 cutaneous mechanoreceptor, hair root plexus, and lamellated corpuscle. Don't worry actually about the name in parentheses, just the other term will be what identified. If you think back, like I said, if you think back to that lecture where we talked about the skin, you saw a lot of these things, and they were actually labeled in that figure of the skin we saw. I just told you we wouldn't worry about them later on. This is that point in the semester. All right, the final type of these somatic sensations is proprioceptive or proprioception. These are sensations that allow us to know where our head and limbs are located, how they're moving, even when we're not looking at them, which enables us to do anything like, as I say, walk and chew gum. So walking, typing, dressing without using our eyes. You think about like, you close your eyes and you can still touch your nose. You can still like feel if your joints are straight or bent. You can tell like the position of your body. If you're like bent over and that kind of stuff, even if you're not like thinking and seeing it, you're mentally aware of it. It's because of these proprioceptors. Okay. Kinesthesia is the perception of your body movements. I just said proprioceptors. Those are the receptors involved with proprioception. Three major types include muscle spindles. Those are visible right here. Their job is to wrap around our various muscle fibers. Remember, muscle fibers are the muscle cells, where they can monitor the length of those fibers. And so they're monitoring the stretch of the muscle, or the length of the muscle. Tendon organs, also go by the term Golgi tendon organs. They're found at the tendon, hence the name, but their job is to monitor the tension that tendon and the muscle are under. And then we don't have a picture of them, that's okay. Joint kinesthetic organs are found within and around the articular capsules. Remember, articular capsules is the connective tissue that hold our synovial joints together. And their job is to monitor joint position and movement. As far as this image, I'm not really worried about you knowing it. So just make sure you know this one for the exam. And like I said, don't get too caught up. I'm not going to ask you, what type of sensation involves touch and vicinity, or I might not, I definitely won't ask you like vibration involves which receptors. I wouldn't ask you to know all that. I mean, look at all that information. There's way too much. Just kind of make sure like these are the four sensations, be able to identify them, and just kind of the main overall arching things there. All right, it seems like a very good spot to stop before we move into the really fun senses. So we'll start with olfaction on Tuesday after we get done with the exam. And I still think we'll be able to finish this lecture on Tuesday after that. We'll see, but I do think that is possible. So